doing it. I'm going to sit, I'm an audience.
Do I need to do a mic check?
We can, but Christine needs to know to unmute it.
At the end?
Yeah, at the end.
Yeah. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes. Oh, Judy. 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 Just a minute or two. Well, good evening. Good evening and welcome to West Shore Unitarian Universalist Church and a Thursday at West Shore. I am Barbara Walker. I am the Commission Lay Minister for our church. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Thanks to all who make these events every single month run smoothly, and to our newest local restaurant, the Himalayan Restaurant on Lorraine and 130th. Hey, wasn't that food yummy? They were so gracious and provided us with the meal at a very low cost, so it was very appreciated. If you want a menu, we have some available, and you can see what else they have. West Shore is a welcoming community. Whoever you are, whoever you love, you are welcome here. This program, Thursdays at West Shore, was created almost 6 years ago as a way to help bring spirituality and community into our week. It's always structured around a community meal, usually provided by a local restaurant. But the programs have been varied. We have had everything from the spirituality of children's literature to a sound bath and the spirituality of sound, book reads, and programs that celebrate our own. Next month, on the third Thursday, on May 18th, we're going to have a special program. We're going to begin to touch on the spirituality of dance. What a broad topic. We are going to dive first, funny enough, into the joy of square dancing. And if that's not your thing, perhaps you've had some square dance trauma from elementary school. I see some shaking of heads that this is the territory I'm in. But be assured that that won't happen here. We have scheduled professional square dance callers to talk about why it's a joy for them. So it should be a fun evening. We're going to have an indoor picnic with some barbecue and something for the vegans and vegetarians as well. So come just have fun with us, enjoy, and the regular TAWS season will be back again in the fall. So tonight's service falls under the category of celebrating one of our very own. All of us have had mountains to climb. Few of us actually go do it literally. Many of us had followed Kelly Pinkas on her journey through social media, on Instagram and on Facebook. Pictures don't do it justice, so we invited her here and she graciously accepted to come share her journey. After the presentation, there will be time for some questions. If you think of them during the service, jot them down on the cards you got when you came in. So for now, sit back, relax, and let us light our chalice. We light our chalice tonight for courage and bravery, to our individual mountains, and to say yes to the journey along the way. I have a reading tonight from Reverend Gretchen Haley, a UU minister. She wrote this greeting for Elizabeth Warren. And yet, you persist. Though you have been warned and given plenty of explanations, reasons to do otherwise, you have persisted to claim a life of joy and justice, to carve out in this time the space for the renewal of your own heart, despite all the reasons, the resistance, fighting for your attention, luring you towards fear. You persist to practice gratitude for this day, this life that has been given, the chance to begin again. And so, let us gather that we might offer one another courage, strength, healing, hope, persist in our kindness, persevere in companionship, and prevail in a life that is for more than ourselves. So come, let us worship tonight together. I'm going to lead you now in a bit of a guided meditation. In about 7-10 minutes, so I want you to relax, get comfortable in your seats. Let me pull it up. As this meditation is taking place with us sitting, find yourself grounded in the chair you are in or the cushion you are in, paying express concentration to the actual sensation of being sitting. Find a position of stability and poise, your upper body balanced over your hips and shoulders in a comfortable but alert position. Hands on your lap or on your knees, arms hanging by their own weight, like heavy curtains, stable and relaxed. Actually sensing your body, feeling your feet, your legs, your hips, your lower and upper body, your arms, your shoulders, your neck, and your head. And when you are ready, allow your eyes to close. Bring some awareness to your breath, the actual physical sensations, feeling each breath as it comes in and goes out, letting the breath be just as it is without trying to change or regulate it in any way, allowing it to flow easily and naturally with its own rhythm and pace, knowing you are breathing perfectly well right now. There is nothing else for you to do. Allowing the body to be still and sitting with a sense of dignity, a sense of resolve, a sense of being complete and whole in this very moment, with your posture reflecting the sense of wholeness. As you sit here, letting an image form in your mind's eye of the most magnificent or beautiful mountain you know or have ever seen or can imagine, letting it gradually come into greater focus. And even if it doesn't come as a visual image, allowing the sense of this mountain and the feeling of its overall shape, its lofty peaks, high in the sky, the large base rooted in the bedrock of the Earth's crust, its steep or gentle sloping sides. Notice how massive it is, how solid, how unmoving, how beautiful, whether far away or up close. Perhaps your mountain has snow blanketed in its top and trees reaching down from the base, or rugged granite sides. There may be streams and waterfalls cascading down the slopes. There may be one peak or a series of peaks, or with meadows and high lakes. Observing it, noting its qualities, and when you feel ready, seeing if you can bring the mountain into your own body, sitting here so that your body and the mountain in your mind's eye become one, so that as you sit here, you share the massiveness and the stillness, the majesty of the mountain. You become the mountain. Grounded in the sitting position, your head becomes the lofty peak, supported by the rest of the body and affording a panoramic view. Your shoulder and arms, the sides of the mountain. Your buttocks and legs are the solid base rooted into the cushion of your chair, experiencing in your body a sense of uplift from deep within your pelvis and your spine. With each breath, as you continue sitting, become a little more of a breathing mountain, alive and vital, yet unwavering in your inner stillness. Completely what you are, beyond words and thought, a centered, grounded, unmoving presence. As you sit here, you become aware of the fact that as the sun travels across the sky, the light and the shadows and the colors are changing virtually moment by moment in the mountain stillness, and the surface teems with life and activity. Streams, melting snow, waterfalls, plants, wildlife. As the mountain sits, seeing and feeling how night follows day and day follows night, bright warming sun, followed by the cool night sky studded with stars, and the dawning of a new day. Through it all, the mountain just sits, experiencing the change in each moment, constantly changing, yet always being just itself. It remains still as the seasons flow into one another and the weather changes moment by moment, calmness abiding all the change. The summer where there is no snow, except perhaps at the very peaks. The fall, the mountain may wear a coat of brilliant fire colors. In winter, that blanket of snow and ice. In any season, it may find itself at a time enshrouded in clouds or fog or pelted by freezing rain. People may come to see the mountain and comment on how beautiful it is, or how it's not a good day to see the mountain, that it's too cloudy or rainy or foggy or dark. None of this matters to the mountain, which remains at all times its essential self. Clouds come and go, tourists like it or not. The mountain's magnificence and beauty are not changed one bit. Spring comes, trees leaf out, flowers bloom in the night meadow. Birds sing in the trees once again. Streams overflow with the water of the melting snow. Through all of it all, the mountain continues to sit unmoved by what happens on its surface, by the world of appearances, remaining its essential self through the seasons, the changing weather, the activity ebbing and flowing. Spend a little more time at your mountain, and when you're ready, come back into the room. In the same way as we sit in meditation, we can learn to experience the mountain. We can embody that same central unwavering stillness and groundedness in the face of everything that happens to change our lives. Over seconds, over hours, over years. In our lives and in our meditation practices, we experience constantly the changing nature of our mind and body and of the outer world. We have our own periods of light and of darkness. Activity and inactivity, our moments of color and our moments of drabness. It is true that we experience storms of varying intensity and violence in the outer world and in our own minds and our bodies. Buffeted by high winds, by cold and rain, we endure periods of darkness and pain, as well as the moments of the joy and uplift. Even our appearances change constantly, experiencing a weather of its own. So if you resonate in some way with the strength and stability of the mountain in your sitting, it may be helpful to use it from time to time in a meditation practice to remind you of what it means to sit mindfully in the stillness. And now, I think it is time that we introduce Kelly Pinkas. You can read her bio. She's going to tell you all about herself, so I'm going to leave it to her.
Good evening. Everybody hear me okay? Thank you, Barbara. Before we get started, I need to issue 2 disclaimers. The write-up for tonight said, I climbed Mount Everest. I did not. I made it to base camp, halfway up. The people who climb Mount Everest are a little crazy. So it takes about 2 months to summit an 8,000-meter peak because of acclimation time, and at least $50,000. Jeff and I had neither, so base camp worked for us. My other disclaimer is I'm probably going to be longer than Reverend Anthony in a sermon. Just warning y'all now. So let's climb a mountain, or base camp, as the case may be. So to be completely transparent, I am not a hiker. I'm not a backpacker. I prefer to sleep in a Marriott versus a tent. But I do love a challenge. I love to travel, and I like a little adventure. Prior to when a friend went to Mount Everest in 2016, I knew a little bit about it. Like, I knew it was the tallest mountain in the world. I knew people went up. I knew some didn't come down. I knew the ones that didn't come down stayed up there. That's as much as I knew. I had no idea base camp was an option, didn't know where it was, didn't worry about it. Carlos went. I'm like, oh, kind of cool. Still not really my thing. Go team for the ones who did. And I never really thought again that I would be going. Wasn't on my radar. Clearly the universe had something else in store for me. So, my adventure began with a Facebook post in 2019. Our good friend Jeff posted that he wanted to go to base camp, and did anybody want to go with him? His husband was not interested in going. And I was intrigued, but I kind of looked away. Jeff and Bruce travel at a whole nother level than what I do, and I had no idea what an adventure like this would cost. So I kind of looked at the post with one eye and kept moving on. Fast forward a couple months later, Gerard and I met Jeff and Bruce for breakfast, and I hadn't even sat down in my chair yet, and Jeff goes, "So, are you going with me?" And Gerard looked at us and was like, "What the hell are you two up to now?" Because Jeff and I can cause a little trouble together. And I'm like, "Well, Jeff is going to Everest Base Camp, and he wants me to go with him." And God love Gerard, the only thing he asked is, "How much was it?" And it's remarkably affordable. So I was in. So we started making plans. And Jeff filled him in, included the cost. Gerard said, "Go for it." He really, I have to give him a shout out. He's incredibly supportive of my shenanigans 99% of the time. So plans were made. I'm pretty sure Jeff was a travel agent in his past life because the attention to detail was unbelievable. We were supposed to go in November of 2020. Yeah, exactly. So the weather was going to be cold. It's off season. We were hoping for dry because it's supposed to be drier then, so little to no snow, cold temperatures we could deal with, and the trails would be relatively light and not crowded. All things that we had big hopes for. And then COVID happened. Nepal was open and closed multiple times in the spring and summer of 2020. Their whole economy is based on the tourist trade, and as you can imagine, the economy crashed. The Sherpas and the porters and the people in the villages and tea houses all the way up on the trails, not just at Everest, but throughout the Everest region, really struggled because the Nepali government did not have money to support them, right? So nobody. They go from 50, 60,000 people coming through March to June to nobody in the country from outside. Open and closed all summer. Clarissa can tell you, all summer, open and closed. You can come, no you can't come. You can come, but you have to quarantine for 2 weeks. You can come, but you need a negative COVID test. Finally, in October, it looked like we were going to be able to go and not have to quarantine. So we're like, all right, let's do this. We really weren't worried about contracting COVID because we were going to be on the mountain, as we say at my house. But 5 days before we were supposed to go, we canceled. And we canceled because we realized we couldn't get a COVID test in Kathmandu to get back on the plane. Nepal had a limited stockpile, and they were only giving them to people who were hospitalized. And Pasang, our guide, was like, "I can get you one, I can get you one." And we're like, yeah, I don't know. Now, after having traveled with Pasang, he absolutely could have gotten one because the man can work magic. But it wasn't a risk we were willing to take. And we didn't want the worry about getting back on the plane to overshadow the whole adventure all the way up. And we said, okay, time is not meant to be right now, but we'll be back. The mountain is clearly not going anywhere. We will come back. So, fast forward to last fall when a window of opportunity opened up in Jeff's schedule, and we decided to go in February, leaving Cleveland on February 1st. We rebooked flights and hotels, we worked with Pasang on plans, what to pack, what to borrow, what we needed, and on February 1st, we were on our way. Our trip plan looked like we were flying from Cleveland to Washington, D.C., to Doha, Qatar, to Kathmandu. We would spend a day and 2 nights in Kathmandu, fly to Lukla, which is an airport at about 9,000 feet elevation at the base of the Everest region, and start walking. Get off the plane, and you hit the trail. And then the trek was going to be 8 days up, 2 days back down. They kind of roll you back down the hill. And then we would repeat it in reverse to get back home. So on the way over, I'm a big fan of the window seat because I like to look at what I'm flying over. So on the way over, we flew over through Sunrise in England, over the Alps, over the Dolomites, part of Egypt, the Suez Canal, the Sahara, the Persian Gulf, and then into the airport in Qatar. There's this crazy juxtaposition, as you can imagine, between like barren dust and sand and all the lush greenness in Doha. And we were there. And then we arrived in Kathmandu around midnight, exhausted. Well, I was exhausted because I was in the back of the plane. Jeff was in business class, so he got to sleep for 8 hours. And I'm very excited. We did get a little panicked as we're waiting at baggage, watching like an unbelievable assortment of luggage come off. Not just luggage, but like TVs and kitchen sets. And this plane must have also served as a cargo plane because it was kind of wild. But our bags still weren't coming off the plane. And I was starting to panic because all my gear was in the plane, including my boots. Now, they tell you, and I agree, you can buy everything you need in Kathmandu, but nobody really wants to break in boots on the way up to Everest Base Camp. Jeff was smarter than I was, and he wore his boots on the plane. Fortunately, literally, the last 4 bags off the plane were ours. And we grabbed our bags. Pasang had met us at the airport and took us through Kathmandu in the middle of the night. So we got to see a little bit of this city. And then we arrived at our awesome little boutique hotel. This hotel was adorable. The accommodations were amazing. Full breakfast, $60 a night. It was incredible. It was better than a Marriott, and I don't say that lightly. So, Kathmandu is a crazy, crowded kaleidoscope of narrow roads, tons of people, and motorbikes everywhere. Everybody gets around on a motorbike. There are cars, but motorbikes are easier. There'd be whole families picking up their kids from school on a motorbike. It's kind of crazy. No sidewalks, no crosswalks, no traffic lights. Everybody just waits at intersections for people to go through, or the major ones, there would be police conducting traffic. And because I like to wander and get distracted by all the shiny objects in the shops, if I was in the middle of the street and there was traffic behind me, you'd just hear this beep, beep, and you'd slide to the right or the left, and they would wait and let you pass. So it was a crazy experience. I've also never been anywhere where I was not the predominant race. So it was a really interesting experience to be a white person in a country of people of color. But it was cool. Let's see. In 2015, there was a 7.8 magnitude earthquake in Nepal. It started in the Everest Valley and came right through and destroyed a ton in Kathmandu. You can still see some of the destruction in some of the buildings. You know, keep in mind this is an ancient city, right? And poor, not well off. I don't think we say third world country anymore, but it would qualify. The picture on the left is how they manage cables. That's all their internet phone. It made everybody in my life that's an internet professional a little queasy looking at it. And then housing in the middle, and then all the bazillions of motorbikes. I have no idea they know whose is whose, but they all seem to sort it out. As a result of the earthquake, there were avalanches that happened on the mountains. There was a huge avalanche on Everest that took out 2 of the camps and came down into base camp. A lot of lives were lost. An entire village in the Langtang Valley was destroyed, just flattened, gone. And then at the other end of the valley at Annapurna, there was also avalanche and destruction. Netflix has an awesome documentary on it called Aftershock. It's about an hour. It's worth it. They've got like live footage of it happening because everybody's got a camera or a GoPro when you're doing these types of treks or mountaineering. So you can still see evidence of the rebuilding in Kathmandu today. Our guide, Pasang, was originally supposed to be on Everest the day of the earthquake and ended up taking a tour group down at the other end of the valley, which probably potentially saved his life. He wasn't supposed to summit that day, but he was supposed to be at base camp. So we're grateful for that. Annapurna, which is where he is one of the 14 8,000 peak meters mountains in the world. So this is us. So that's Jeff in the front, and then me, and Lakpa is in the middle. He was our porter, and then Pasang on the left, who was our guide. This is the gate into the national park, and I'm sorry, I do not know how to say the Nepali word for Everest. I don't want to try and guess and get it wrong, but that's the saga first word, that's Everest in Nepali, right? That's what they call it. Everest was named for a British gentleman that discovered it, or was probably the first white person to see it in the mid-1800s. And his name was actually pronounced Everest, not Everest, and it's got changed over time. So, thanks to trekking during the off-season and a series of fortunate events, our group was just the 4 of us. There was nobody else with us. It's low season when you're there in February. Peak season starts on March 1st. So around day 2 of the trek, Pasang and Lakpa divided us up. So Jeff and Lakpa would go first. Jeff's a very tall man. I don't know, 6'4"? He's huge. It's double my size. Pasang, the porter, Lakpa, the porter, despite carrying 80 pounds of baggage on his back, could just take off. I was slow and shorter legs, so Pasang just hung back with me. So these two gentlemen were incredible. They could not do enough to help us. They made sure we took water breaks. We were rested, always brought us hot tea. When Lakpa discovered I liked sugar in my tea, most of the time we would get to a tea house. Before I could even sit down, there was a cup of tea in one hand and the sugar in the other. They were just so genuinely kind and caring. It was unbelievable. And truly, they're the reasons we made it to the top. We would never have done it on our own. And Pasang put up with all my 9 million questions. He probably regretted being at the back of the pack with me, but there he was. So these are some of the scenes. So this lady on the left was at the airport, and I just loved her. She was waiting to go back up to the Everest region. She'd been in Kathmandu for whatever. A lot of people during the low season will leave the villages on the mountainside and come into the city and then go back up. I just thought she was very sweet. The middle picture is when we were flying to Lukla, which is the airport that we landed in. We were flying even with the peaks in the background. It was kind of crazy. And then that's the inside of our plane. It was a terrible plane. It was a prop jet. It was 2 rows of chairs. There were 12 of us on the plane. One of the guys from the British group was pretty convinced he was going to die in the process. All he kept, I think he was probably rocking back and forth in his chair. Oh my God, we're going to die, we're going to die. It was only a 20-minute flight, so it was okay. And there was no beverage service on that plane. So after landing, we stopped for tea. There's a little tea house right next to the airport that everybody stops at. And then Pasang took us to his home to meet his mom, which was an incredible experience. She has not had an easy life. She was a single parent when Pasang was 4. And she still wears traditional Tibetan dress. And his brother is also a guide. And she's clearly very proud of her kids and just was so unbelievably kind. Little fact about the airport, Lukla is the most dangerous airport in the world. It's a super short runway, so the plane brakes and kind of skids to a stop, and when you take off, it essentially flings itself off over the edge and you dip and you come back. Part of the reason it's so dangerous is it's surrounded on 3 sides by mountains, so there's no room for error. So I never felt unsafe, but it is a little wild to land there. As soon as you get off the plane, you start walking. And the scenery is incredible. We're at about 9,000 feet right now. The first day we dropped, actually, in altitude. The trails varied from the one on the left, which was pretty decent, to the one on the right, which was sort of decent, and got worse the higher we went. Local people maintained them all. They were super clean. We didn't have any trouble. You hear stories about Everest being dirty. That was not our experience. The weather the first couple days was gorgeous. It was sunny, probably about 50 degrees. And we were headed the first day to a village called Phakdin, traveling downhill to an elevation of about 8,700 feet. By lunchtime, I was in trouble. So in the States, I'm allergic to every single tree and every kind of grass. And apparently, I'm also allergic to those things in Nepal, which I didn't plan on. I'm like, it's February, and I have not had allergy trouble in the States in a long time. But I'm telling you, by lunchtime, I was a snotty, sneezing mess. Thanks to my inhaler and antihistamines and a very patient group, we made it to our tea house that day. The host there was super kind and accommodating, and our first meal on the trail was pretty good. Fun fact, that tea house didn't have power for 10 days because the whole village was out. I don't really remember why. While we were at the tea house, we befriended a younger couple from Sweden and their guide who were on the same itinerary, and we would kind of follow each other up the trail at least part of the way. So day 2 took us to this swinging bridge. So the thing that's important to remember once you land in Lukla, there are no roads. Everything that comes in and out of the Everest Valley happens on something's back, whether it's a porter, a yak, or a donkey. And the porters and the animals have the right of way. They all wear bells, so you know they're coming, and you move to the inside because they'll knock you off the trail. About 2 weeks before we were there, a German woman died because she was standing on the outside, and a yak knocked her off, and she went over the edge of the cliff. Now, I will tell you that never would have happened to us because Lakpa was like, get back. He had no English, but he could tell us to get back, and he moved out of the way. And I think he was more worried about me being distracted than Jeff, but anyway. And then we walked over the swinging bridges. So very early the next morning, while we were in Phakdin, I woke up to the sound of a bell and a bouncing light. I'm like, what is going on? And I couldn't tell where it was coming from, but I got out of bed and I looked out the window, and there was a shepherd and a group of donkeys walking by on the trek up the hill, and the light was his lantern, and you could hear the donkeys' bells. It was a very charming way to get up, and I was like, okay, I'm on the mountain now. Got it. So the river. So the bridge is in the back, if you can see them. The lower bridge is out of commission. The upper bridge is called the Hillary Bridge, and it's 450 feet off the ground. That was our goal for day 2. And we had to climb up the elevation, cross the bridge, and then we would go into Namche Bazaar. So this is Namche Bazaar is the gateway to the Everest Valley. It's a thriving village that caters to tourists. There's tons of tea houses, lodges, shops, restaurants, pharmacies. But I'm telling you, this day was hard. It's the single biggest day of elevation gain. We gained about 3,000 feet in elevation that day. Namche sits at 11,300 feet. Phakdin was at 8,700. So it was just long, hard steps. The trails were well groomed, but they're still rocky trails, and there's still steps of all different depths built in. We would go up the steps like toddlers. So we would go step, and then step. Half the time, that was the only way I could do it because they were so deep I could never climb them like a normal human being. So, but we made it. We had to cross the entire, of course, every village we went to, I swear, Pasang booked the tea house at the opposite end of the village. So we got into Namche and we stopped in front of a tea house. I'm like, sweet, thank God, we're finally here. I just want to take a nap. It was closed because it's low season. So we ended up going across. And the village is built into the side of a mountain. So you can see, that's Namche. So we're like up and down, and I'm like, really, if I just curl up on the side here, they can scoop me up in the morning, I'll be okay. But they did not leave me behind. So there is a saying in the mountaineering world, you sleep low and walk high, which is what the next day meant because it was our acclimation day. So there were 2 days on the trek where you stayed in the same village and walked up 400 or 500 feet to continue your altitude acclimation, and then you would come back down. And that's partly the reason why it takes so long to summit Everest. They do a lot of 2 steps forward, 3 steps back work. They'll go up to Camp 2, come back to Camp 1, go up to 3, come down to 2, continually trying to acclimate their body to the change in oxygen levels. But this was our first glimpse of Everest, right? So there she is. Kind of, in some ways, unassuming, flat-topped, not super rugged. Everest, compared to most, if not all of the other 8,000-meter peaks, is the easiest climb if you're inclined to go to the very top. But man, the first time we saw it, you just stand there. There's not the right adjectives to describe the view. And it was another absolutely gorgeous day. So this is Tenzing Norgay, also known as Tenzing Sherpa. He was the Sherpa with Sir Edmund Hillary when they summited Everest on May 29, 1953. They were the first 2 to ever successfully summit Everest. And, fun fact that I didn't know until I was preparing for this, Tenzing saved Hillary's life a couple days before. Hillary had fallen into a crevasse during the climb, and Tenzing was the one who pulled him out. And Sir Edmund went, I want you on my team. And they climbed up together and did this summit. And the airport in Lukla is named for him. But if you think about the history of Everest, we all know who Sir Edmund Hillary is, but none of us know who his Sherpa was. And Edmund did not get there without a Nepali Sherpa by his side. So on the other side, so I'm looking at Everest this way, behind me is the valley we climbed up out of. That was the 3,000 feet gain that we did the day before. And we kind of saw it and we were like, hot damn, we actually did that. It was pretty amazing that we did it. And there was cell coverage all the way up the mountain, so both Jeff and I FaceTimed our husbands so they got to see Everest with us. I tried to call Clarissa, but it was late at night and she hung up on me. So, as a bonus, there were a bunch of hawks riding thermals, right? And my dad, when he was alive, loved to watch this. So it was like a little wave from my dad from beyond. It was kind of cool. I was bawling at the time. Pasang was looking at me like, oh my God, what am I going to do with you? But we made it through. So, rested and restored by the acclimation day that we can actually do this. And our first views of Everest, it was time to leave Namche and head to Tengboche, home of a Buddhist monastery, and our next stop. So some of these are the trails on the way up. Can't really see the one on the left, but these were actually really nice trails. Most of the time they were smooth. There were some steps and a little bit rocky, but the trek to Tengboche was really lovely. So this is me sleeping. Well, not yet, but so at night it would get crazy cold. The tea houses didn't have central heat. They would have a stove in the main room that they would light at dinner time if you asked, and that was it. So in our rooms, I slept in wool socks, fleece-lined leggings, a long-sleeve thermal shirt, a fleece sweatshirt, a hat. I was always in a hat. And then in a cold-rated sleeping bag with a sleeping bag liner, under a comforter, the tea houses provided. And as we got further up, because it was sub-zero the last 2 nights, I was sleeping with gloves on and would have to keep my phone in a glove in the sleeping bag with me because the battery was just trashed by the cold weather. So we're at Tengboche Monastery, which is across the street, if you will, from the tea house that we stayed in. And apparently we both learned just last week you can actually rent rooms there and stay for the night. It's an active monastery, and people will often go to Tengboche to see the monks and then come back down. So continued beautiful weather, clear skies, sunny, mild temperatures, definitely getting colder as we climbed. Trails were in good condition. The altitude gain was manageable. Neither of us were suffering from altitude sickness. At one point on this day, I was alone on the trail. Jeff and Lakpa were up ahead of me. Pasang was moseying behind me, probably taking phone calls because I was moving so slow. He had plenty of time. And it was just magical to be like, felt like you were the only person in the world. I didn't feel unsafe, and it was just super peaceful. And the hawks were still flying along beside me. So it was really cool. The tea house at Tengboche was probably one of the absolute nicest that we stayed in the whole time, and the food was best. I had a pizza that night. In Tengboche is where we picked up our friend Rusty. So that's what I named him. I don't know what his real name was. So there were dogs up and down the trail the whole time. They were probably medium size. I would say Rusty 45-ish pounds. Thick coats, big feet, as you would imagine. They've adapted to the environment that they live in. And they would just find a group of trekkers, probably whoever fed them the best food, and just hang out. Jeff was bribing Rusty to go with us by giving him granola bars. So he stayed with us until the last day before we went to base camp. So he followed us up to 17,000 feet elevation. So the next night we headed to Dingboche in Amadablam. This is probably my favorite picture, and it's become my favorite mountain. This was across the way from our tea house. This one sits at 6,800 meters, so it's not taller than Everest, but it is an exponentially harder technical climb than most of the other 8,000 peak mountains. Because between the two peaks is a ridge that you have to cross that's 30 inches wide. I saw one video on Instagram where they're like, we recommend you practice yoga for balance. I'm like, no. I need a rope, and I'm crawling if I were going to do it. But it's just the texture, and then this was sunset, so it was just absolutely magical. So while we were in Dingboche, our Swedish friends caught up with us, and unfortunately, Emma has become very sick from altitude sickness, and she was struggling with high-altitude pulmonary edema, or HAPE. Her pulse ox on oxygen was 60. And is no bueno. So, and she's a doctor, right? She and her husband's are doctors. And so our guide, her guide, the tea house innkeeper, all stayed up all night with her to make sure she would make it through the night. And they arranged for a helicopter to come get her the next day. Took her down to Lukla, took her to Kathmandu. She stayed in the hospital overnight in Kathmandu. And then they wouldn't let her leave Kathmandu for a week until everything settled down. She's good now. There is no rhyme or reason to who gets altitude sickness. You would think the 56-year-old asthmatic would have struggled. Never had a problem. Didn't have headaches, didn't have appetite loss, was never nauseous. I didn't have any breathing trouble. Jeff was the same way. And this young woman, I don't even think she's 30, struggled. And Pasang will tell you he knows Sherpa who have gone to the summit, and then sometimes they get sick. It's just where your body's at in the moment. All along the trail are these prayer rocks. So the local monks paint prayers on the rocks, and they're everywhere, you can see. Some of them are like low, and you can understand how they were able to paint it. Some of them are up in the side, and I'm like, they had to have carried ladders with them. I don't understand how this happened. The Sherpa people, the people in the mountains, are Buddhist. Down in Kathmandu, 80% are Hindu, but up in the mountains, they're Buddhist because they emigrated in from Tibet some time ago. So there's stupa all over the mountain and prayer wheels, right? And prayer flags as you go. There's also all these little rock piles, which are memorials to the people who have passed along the way. It's kind of cool. And then prayer flags. So prayer flags, the Buddhists like to fly them high because they believe the wind will carry the prayers out into the world for the people. So this is me. For those of you who don't know, I'm a 5th degree black belt in a Korean style, and I took my uniform with me because I'm that big of a karate nerd. So I told my students I was taking it with me because I wanted to take the hardest thing I've ever worked for on the hardest thing I've ever done. And this day was picture day. So this was an acclimation day, and we were up on the hill, and Pasang's like, good pictures, let's do it. So that's Amadablam behind me on the picture on the left. And on the picture on the right, you can't see it in this image, but that's Lhotse on the left, and right next to Lhotse sits Everest. So I took my uniform. Next time I go, I'm not taking it, but I took it this time. More trails. So the trails are getting progressively rockier, more difficult to climb. We're past the tree line now. Some vegetation, no more birds. Some animals, but the animals were small yak, goats, kind of what you would expect. This was not a fun trail day. It was hard. On the plus side, because there's no trees, my allergies are now under control. However, because it was colder, I'm now wearing 2 pairs of pants, 4 shirts, and 2 coats. Part of the trail on this day led us to a memorial park. So there's a plateau, and there's a memorial that the Buddhists did for all the local Sherpa who have died on Everest and didn't come back. So again, if you die above Camp 3, I believe it is, on Everest, they don't bring you down because the level of effort to retrieve the body is too much physical strain on the people doing the work. So you're left there. So there's these little rock piles all over. There's an actual memorial. Jeff brought prayer flags and strung them up from the memorial on the left. But it was amazingly peaceful, and the energy there was just, I don't even know how to describe it. I could have sat there all afternoon, and not just because I was tired, but it was magical. On the left, you see the green and red bags. Those are mine and Jeff's bags bound together for Lakpa to put up on his back to carry. So a little history lesson for you. So the term Sherpa is used to describe the local tribe of people. Think about how we use words like Cherokee or Inuit. That's the Sherpa people, right? The Sherpa came into Nepal from Tibet about 600 years ago. And the word Sherpa is used to describe guides like Pasang and porters like Lakpa. They're both Sherpa. All the people who live in the Himalayas have the same last name, Sherpa. They also have the same first names because the Buddhists give in this area, their kids are all named for the day of the week they were born on. So if Pasang means Friday, Lakpa means Wednesday. If 2 kids in your house were born on Friday, you now have 2 Pasangs. And they go by their middle names, which it would be different. And they're non-binary, so they're not gendered. So girls and boys all have the same names. So all the people who live in the Himalayas have the same last name of Sherpa, thanks to a census clerk error. Rather than take last names, they just called them all Sherpa after the tribe name, and that's who they are. They have also evolved biologically so that they process oxygen more efficiently, which is why they're so good at the high altitude work. Their mitochondria work differently than those of us who live at sea level so that they can manage the high altitudes more effectively. So this was day 13. This was supposed to be the big day. So we were going from Lubache to Gorakshep, Point B for lunch. Then we were supposed to go to base camp, come back to Gorakshep for dinner and sleep, and then start rolling downhill. It was crazy cold and crazy windy. I think at one point it was 20 below with the wind that day. So it was cold enough that Lakpa put on his parka and Pasang had his hat on, which was the first time in the whole trek that they both layered up. Landscape's getting super rocky, lots of efforts to cross. And by the time we got to the tea house for lunch, I was a solid 15 minutes behind Jeff and Lakpa, and I was done. I looked at Jeff and Pasang and went, y'all go ahead, I'm going to take a nap. And they're like, what? I'm like, I don't have the legs to make it to base camp and back to the tea house before dark. And Pasang, God love him, looks at me and he goes, I'll carry you. I'm like, no, that's not happening. I'd rather call it quits at 17,000 feet than have you carry me back from base camp. Thank you very much. So early on, these are across from the tea house that we were in. Early on, Jeff and I had agreed that if for whatever reason one of us couldn't get to base camp, that was fine. You stay where you are, the other person continues and picks you up on the way back down. So I'm like, I'm done. I'm exhausted. I'm cold. I just want to crawl into my sleeping bag and take a nap. I didn't even want lunch. I was done. And Jeff's like, well, I don't want to go without you now. I'm like, very nice, but we have a plane to catch in 2 days, so we don't have any extra time here to hang out, because I'll be fine tomorrow, but tomorrow we're supposed to be walking downhill for 8 hours. Jeff looks at Pasang and he goes, can we get a helicopter? Pasang's like, sure, give me 15 minutes. And he disappears, and he comes back, and he goes, okay, the helicopter can pick you up either tomorrow night or the next morning. It'll be X amount of dollars. There's 3 seats, so we can fly down. And internally, we're going, sweet, we don't have to walk for 18 hours straight downhill. But 3 seats, there's 4 of us, no room for Lakpa. And we needed Pasang with us to manage the airport and all of that at the bottom of the mountain in Lukla. Now, I would tell you, I don't think Lakpa had any interest in flying down in a helicopter with us. I think he was completely content to walk. So we made the plans. Lakpa's like, I'm good, I'll walk. I could be home tonight. I'm like, oh my God. He put his sneakers on, put his parka on, grabbed a Coke from the concession stand in the tea house, and took off. He made it back down to Lukpa in a day and a half. Because this is like 1 o'clock now, so he probably walked till dark, got up the next morning. I think he made it all the way to Namche and then cruised down the next day. So it was kind of crazy. But the next day, there was no wind, and it was cold and clear, and we were heading for base camp. So the thing to remember about Everest is it sits on a glacier, right? And the valley and base camp is rock over a glacier. So it's crazy trails, rocky, it definitely was the rockiest, most unsteady trail that we were on. Closer we got, the more primal the landscape became. No trees, no animals, no birds, nothing. And we were the only 4 on the trail. So it was like, truly you feel like where time began. Some of the mountains, the way they were jutting up, reminded me of the way like humpback whales come out of the ocean. Like you could just imagine them bursting up from the floor. So it was pretty cool. So this is a glacier pool, but it's solid sheet ice, and you can see the ice on the sides as well. The uniform came back out. So I am not a believer in the adage of everything happens for a reason, but I will tell you the universe was taking care of us because we were the only 4 people, well, 3 people, I'm sorry, because Lakpa wasn't with us there. There were no other trekkers, no other guides, no porters, no tents, nobody prepping to summit. There was us. There ended up one guy showing up a little bit later, but it started just the 3 of us. So my uniform came back out and I climbed on top of the rock. That rock is a lot higher off the ground than what you think it is. It was a little scary being up there, which is why I'm sitting. But I kind of feel, again, I don't like the saying everything happens for a reason, but man, if we'd gone the day before, everybody we trekked up with would have been there, and it would have been fine. It wasn't a lot of people, maybe 30, but to be just 3 was a gift. It really was. So there's 3 of us. We did it. 2 coats. 2 pants, 4 shirts, because it's still cold. So there's Jeff and I. You can see the height difference. I'm 5 foot. He's huge. So the following morning, the helicopter came, picked us up, and we were in Lukla in 20 minutes, flying over the valley and everything we would have taken 18 hours to walk down. We got to the airport, and the plane that would take us to Kathmandu was there waiting for us because Basong had made the call and said, hey, we're coming in. Do you have room for 3 people on the plane? And so because it's part cargo, part plane, they took out some of the cargo that they were carrying and put in 3 seats and bolted them down, and we got on the plane and off we went. So it was, you just have to kind of not look too closely at some things when we were there. And then within the hour, we were in Kathmandu, and we were in the shower. So the first time I'd showered in 10 days. When we were planning for this trip, and I would tell people I was going with Jeff, another man, people would look at me like, huh? And I'm like, neither one of our husbands want to go. And they'd be like, oh, okay, we get that. And apparently I didn't learn until afterward that Jeff would tell people I was his only friend that was willing to go unshowered for 10 days. So that was our shtick as we went. And it was true. Didn't take a shower for 10 days. It was all right. And because we came down the mountain 2 days earlier, we opted to leave Kathmandu early. Jeff actually flew home that night, and I left the following day. So I had one last day in Kathmandu, and I was able to go to both the Grand Stupa and the primary temple, which is a Mecca site for Hindus in the whole India, Nepal region. So it was pretty cool. I was also able to have lunch with our Swedish friends. So I was able to lay eyes on them and make sure they were okay and check in. So it was pretty sweet. So the Nepali people in Sherpa in particular are so kind and so gentle, and they work in what is often difficult circumstances, and I think probably go very unappreciated way too often. I think they're the people who do the work that other people don't see. And Jeff and I saw it and acknowledged it, and I think that's part of the reason why Lakpa took such good care of me, right? He was just super kind. Life on the mountain, not easy. There's no washers, there's no dryers, there's no central heat, some places had electricity, everybody had internet, which is kind of wild. But everybody was happy and seemed content with the lives that they had. Everybody just walked around in puffy coats and pants and flip-flops, which I still don't understand either. If you haven't watched it yet, check out the documentary 14 Peaks on Netflix. It is about Nims Persia, who is a Nepali man who with a team summits all 14 of the 8,000 plus meter mountains in 7 months. Never been done. It's a world record. The man is incredible. At the end, he did 3 of the 8,000ers in 1 week. Everest, Lhotse, and one other one. Like they went up and came down, up and came down. But just truly amazing. His point in making this documentary was to tell the world that nobody summits any of these mountains without a Nepali team of Sherpa with them, and that's true. Whether you're climbing K2 in Pakistan or any of the other 8,000 meters in Nepal, there are always Nepali guides on your team because they are the absolute best at what they do. They will even go to, I don't know the name of it, there's a ginormous mountain in Argentina that Nepali guides will go into. They are the elite of what they do. And his point was to bring attention and pride to the Nepali people as a result. And make sure that these tireless workers, and it is all men, there are like 2 Nepali women, none of which lead teams up to the summits yet. But to bring attention to the work that all of these people do. So it's a great documentary. So the trek changed and challenged me in ways I'm still trying to figure out. It's been 2 months, still haven't quite figured it all out yet. I had to learn to slow down. It is not my MO to go slow. I like to go head first into things. But I had to slow down so that I could breathe and rest and make sure I could do the whole trek. My mind settled, probably because there wasn't 9,000 things going on around me. I didn't mind not having my usual creature comforts. It was okay I didn't finish at a Marriott every night and that I went 10 days without a shower. I was open to the experience and genuinely grateful to be there. I do hope to go back. Julia's going to go with me. There's another trek I want to do that there's a set of glacier lakes Everest is here, the lakes are northwest, I guess, right on the Tibetan border. Remember, Everest sits on the Nepali-Tibetan border. One side you go up from Tibet, the other side you go up from Nepal. I want to go back. I want to see Pasang. I want to see Lakpa. I want to see Pasang's mom, right? Jeff is considering going as well, but he wants to go to the other end. He's like, Everest Base Camp, and they're done that. He wants to go trek to Annapurna Base Camp and see the views at the other end of the valley. And I have no doubt that Pasang will take him on that trip as well. So that's what I did.
Stay put, because I think we're going to have some questions for you.
Sure.
So let's do our closing words and extinguish our chalice. The closing words that I found for you tonight are from Nelson Mandela. I have walked that long road to freedom. I have tried not to falter. I have made missteps along the way, but I have discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. I have taken a moment here to rest, to steal a view of a glorious vista that surrounds me, to look back on the distance I have come. But I can rest only for a moment, for with freedom comes responsibilities, and I dare not linger, for my long walk is not yet ended. Blessed be, amen, and namaste. Namaste.
Namaste, right? That's traditional greeting there. I'm like, oh, like I'm in yoga. And in karate, martial arts, right? We hand everything two hands. They all do that. I was home. It was kind of cool. Yeah.
I'm just going to extinguish it, and then she's going to come around with the mic for the questions.
It's not, oh, it is working. Just turned up.
Okay, anybody have questions? Yo,
You mentioned 14 Peaks and
Yes.
Aftershock. I'm
Netflix.
preparing myself to come to this event tonight to hear your adventures in Everest. The Aftershock was worth seeing. Did you have to walk over a ladder
No.
as a crab? Was
No, that happens higher up. So base camp is at 17,500 feet. The crevasses that they put those ladders
Yes.
over start at like Camp 1 and Camp 2. I'm not doing that, Howard. That's crazy.
Yeah, I
talk.
would not do it. I'm scared the heck out of me. Just looking at the movie, and I'm ready.
Yeah. So do you guys know what he's talking about? So to
The
climb
Aftershock.
over the cracks in the mountain, they lay like an aluminum extension ladder and you walk over them.
It looked very scary to me.
There's ropes and you're clipped into the ropes, but come on. Who wants to do
But
that?
I do recommend people seeing Aftershock and 14
Oh,
Peaks.
Aftershock
It's
was
excellent.
very good.
yeah, yeah. Okay, who's next? Here we go. I have a question real quick while I'm thinking. But, okay, so flying down in the helicopter,
Yeah, it's cool.
did you feel any change, pressure in your body?
I didn't feel pressure change on the flight, but as soon as we landed at Lukla, you could tell the altitude was different.
Okay.
It was kind of wild to go, because we went from 17,000 to 9,000 feet in 20, 25 minutes. And I'm like, I wonder if we'll notice. And we're like, oh yeah, you can tell. That's cool.
So did you do any special training here in order to be ready for that, like with your breathing or strength training or anything
No,
like that?
so, because we're at what, 600 feet above sea level, I couldn't do any altitude training. I couldn't convince Gerard to go to like Pikes Peak. That's where he drew the line at my shenanigans. I did strength training, a lot of cardio, right, and yoga. So I could do weight-bearing exercise and karate. It was mostly enough. I felt pretty good, strength-wise. I was never sore on the trail. My stamina issue was all allergy-related. I'd take way different medication next time, like more.
Kelly, you didn't really mention the basic going to the bathroom. How did you?
Oh.
Where did you?
So, yeah, so it's a fair question. So, on the trail, because I'm not a man, I held it. But the tea houses all had bathrooms and they all had Western toilets because they cater to Western tourists. They did have the typical Asian toilet with the hole in the ground, but there was always at least one toilet I was used to. What is interesting is they would have running water, but they don't really have, like, they're not connected to plumbing and sewer, so I'm not asking where those lines went to. And the toilets didn't flush like ours did. There would be buckets of water in the corner, and you'd scoop water out and dump it like we do when the power is out, kind of thing. So,
Okay.
in the back.
Gotta be more questions. Whoa, okay.
Back left, Judy. Back left.
Stay here, stay here. Oh,
The food on the trail was kind of lousy. I won't lie. They tell you not to eat any meat because of how it has to come in and out, it's at least 1 day out from refrigeration. That part was fine, but it was just, It was also low season, so they weren't fully stocked. We had a lot of eggs and toast and oatmeal.
Do they still use Mount Everest as the name of the mountain, or they use their culture name?
I'm sorry, ask me again?
Do they still call it Mount Everest, period? Have they changed the name of the mountain?
Yeah, they call it Mount Everest. Everybody in the valley refers to it as Mount Everest, but the Nepali name is that saga that I can't pronounce. I get the syllable emphasis wrong, so I don't want to
coming through.
mess it up.
Okay.
Hello, I'm wondering a couple of things. How many kilometers or miles did you walk each day going upwards?
Oh.
And how long did it take each day?
It's a good question. I don't know the daily breakdown. I think it's 68 kilometers round trip, if you do it round trip. Most days we walked about 4 to 6 hours max. The exception was day 2, the day from hell when we went to Namche. That was about an 8-hour day. But we always, even when we walked through lunch, we would take an hour at lunch. So we might have been out most of the day, but we weren't moving the whole time. I will tell you, at some point, my phone and my watch stopped pairing on the trip, and I had to wipe all the data off my watch. So I have 9 days of no fitness data, so I can't tell you how many steps I took, how many flights of stairs I climbed. I'm still resentful about it. So
Yeah.
I went out and bought a new watch afterward because I was so mad.
Okay. Anybody else? Oh, thank you.
I was curious too about how much you walk, but did you need to have permits?
We do. You have to pay for permits. And there are checkpoints along the way. So when we went into the national park, Pasang took care of all our permits, but we had to provide pictures. So they do track you. They have just recently passed a law where nobody can walk alone now. You have to have a guide with you. There were 2 people on the trek kind of beside us that were walking independently. You can do it. It's very well marked and clear. I would never in a million years do it, especially low season. Like, what if you fall? But everybody's a little bit different. But you have to have a guide now, which is great for the Sherpa and the porter, because then they get business, and I think the government got tired of going in and trying to find people who were lost. So you have to have guides now.
And then what language do they speak?
What language do they speak? Pasang speaks 5. He speaks Tibetan, he speaks Nepali, there's a Hindu, and I forget the other 2. There's probably some Chinese mixed in. Because of where Nepal sits, it's kind of a melting pot of people and language. And then English, right? Everybody in Kathmandu spoke English at some level. Lakpa didn't, or at least pretended he didn't. I don't know if he really did. But Pasang his language, English was fabulous. Yeah.
You mentioned that people who died above a certain
Mm-hmm. You stay there. Yep. No, they're frozen solid. Because it's always sub-zero up there. You get past a certain point, and it's always sub-zero. So if anybody's heard of Green Boots, right? He was kind of a famous guy on the trail, right? He was an Indian mountaineer, died in the early aughts, and he had lime green mountaineering boots on, and he was literally just curled up off the side of the trail right near the top. Well, they can't move you because you're now in the death zone. So oxygen's at 40%. And they go up with oxygen, but they only go with enough to get you up and back down to Camp 4. And to move a dead body is a lot of effort. So you stay where you drop. There's a guy I started following on Instagram after the 14 Peaks documentary, and he's showing a video, and he's taking a group up past the Hillary Steps, which is the last bit of trail before you get to the summit, and there's a body across the trail. And he's like, oh man, there's a body. He goes, go around it and we'll take care of it when we come back. And so what they do is they identify it and they move you off the trail, but that's where you stay. Oh, wow. Yeah. Someday if global warming takes all the snow down, it's going to be... There's about 300 people up there. Mountaineers. I don't think that counts Sherpa. I don't know how many Sherpa are up there. Wow. Yeah, Bruce. Annapurna. Annapurna is at the other end of the valley. It's an 8,000 meter beast. It is exponentially more dangerous. 1 out of every 3 mountaineers doesn't come back down from that one because the weather is constantly shifting. They just rescued a mountaineer out of a crevice that was 250 feet down. He'd been there for 3 days, and he's still around, but maybe they don't know. It's I don't know what Annapurna is. I'd have to Google it for you. If Everest is what, 80? I kind of avoid Annapurna because it scares me. Once I heard that 1 out of every 3, I'm like, nope, I'm good. There is a trail. You can go all the way around it because it sits solidly in Nepal. And there's 2 Annapurnas. There's 1 and 2. Let's see if I can get you the height. What does Wikipedia tell us? It's 8,091 meters, so it's at 26,500 feet. But it's the weather patterns that shift on it so dramatically is why it's so dangerous. And it, it has the same altitude issues with low oxygen at the top. And
does Annapurna have a base camp?
it does. It does. Amadoblin, the one with the gold tip that I showed you, it's my favorite. They all have base camps and staged camps all the way up because you have to acclimate all the way up them. It just, depending on the height, you acclimate less. K2, Everest, take the longest because they're so tall.
Do you want to just holler?
No, super clean, and there's recycling bins all the way up. It's kind of crazy. Little stone huts with garbage and recycling.
What was the price tag for this little adventure?
We paid Pasang $1,500. That was all my hotels, all my meals, his time, Lakpa's time, and my flight and my permits in and out of Lukla. My airfare was $2,000, and then the helicopter cost me $600. It was worth every penny. So all in, probably about 4-ish. Not bad when you consider I was there for 13 days. Yeah, the trek part was the cheapest of the whole adventure when you consider everything I got for it. 3 meals a day, guides, permits, airfare on that fancy plane. Yes. The porters will only carry 22 kilos per person. Jeff was over, I was under, so we netted out the same. He overpacked, and his clothes are bigger, so he was heavier. So we kind of offset each other. Anything over that, you have to carry yourself. And the plane also had a weight limit, because you saw the plane. So, Tom.
At the time, you were wearing the most clothing.
Yep.
Was all of that clothing you had bought?
Yes, it was everything I bought. So the last couple days, 2 pair of fleece lined pants, 2 pair of wool socks, my hiking boots, a moisture wicking tank, a wool base layer, a turtleneck, a fleece-lined sweatshirt, a 680 fill down coat, and a windbreaker. And I was still cold. Not once you do the higher elevations, no. In the wind also, I shouldn't say that. It'll be warmer over the next couple months, which is why it's peak season, but you get to base camp, it's always cold because it's at 17,000 feet. So, for 2 days it was doable. And the sun was out, so it made it, you know, right after we left, they had snow. They had over a foot of snow. We're like, oh, thank God. No snow.
So you didn't have any tent?
No, we stayed in tea houses the whole time, which are glorified tents. They're single wall construction, you know, like if the wind blew really hard, the room kind of moved, but they're at least inside. The last morning, we saw our breath inside our rooms. It was a little chilly. It made it really hard to want to get up and get dressed. Get dressed inside your sleeping bag. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I appreciate it. Yeah, absolutely. I'm around. You know where I sit.
Round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.